In this session, we will discuss Servlet filter. What is a Servlet filter? So, in this session, we will discuss filter. What is a filter? चलिए समझते हैं फिल्टर क्या होता है सर्वलेट में. ओके, सपोज जैसे हम लोग रिक्वेस्ट सेंड करते हैं, क्लाइंट से हमने रिक्वेस्ट सेंड की सर्वलेट, तो ये क्लाइंट है हमारा और ये हमारा मान लीजिए सर्वर है. सर्वर के अंदर बहुत सारे सर्वलेट बने, सर्वलेट 1, सर्वलेट 2. ओके, क्लाइंट ने जैसे रिक्वेस्ट सेंड की, मान लीजिए सर्वलेट 1 के लिए रिक्वेस्ट सेंड की. अब रिक्वेस्ट किसके लिए गई है? सर्वलेट 1 के लिए. लेकिन बिफोर प्रोसेसिंग द रिक्वेस्ट बाय द सर्वलेट 1, हम इस रिक्वेस्ट को क्या करना चाहते हैं? ट्रैप करना चाहते हैं. ट्रैप करना मतलब कुछ प्रोसेस करना चाहते हैं बिफोर प्रोसेसिंग द रिक्वेस्ट बाय द सर्वलेट 1. तो हमने क्या यूज करा यहाँ पे? देखिए, सर्वलेट 1 द्वारा इस रिक्वेस्ट को प्रोसेस करने से पहले हम इस रिक्वेस्ट में कुछ प्री प्रोसेसिंग लॉजिक एग्जीक्यूट करना चाहते हैं. उसी तरह जैसे जब रिस्पॉन्स आता है, सर्वर ने जैसे रिस्पॉन्स सेंड किया क्लाइंट को, तो क्लाइंट पे रिस्पॉन्स सेंड करने से पहले या रिस्पॉन्स वापस भेजने से पहले, इफ यू वांट टू परफॉर्म पोस्ट प्रोसेसिंग रिक्वेस्ट, प्री प्रोसेसिंग एंड पोस्ट प्रोसेसिंग, दो वर्ड यहाँ पे हम लोग समझते हैं. प्री प्रोसेसिंग ऑफ रिक्वेस्ट एंड बोल सकते हैं पोस्ट प्रोसेसिंग ऑफ रिक्वेस्ट. प्री प्रोसेसिंग रिक्वेस्ट का मतलब रिक्वेस्ट को प्रोसेस होने से पहले अगर कोई लॉजिक एग्जीक्यूट करना है, इफ यू वांट टू परफॉर्म एनी एक्टिविटी बिफोर प्रोसेसिंग ऑफ द रिक्वेस्ट, और इफ यू वांट टू परफॉर्मिंग एनी एक्टिविटी आफ्टर प्रोसेसिंग द रिक्वेस्ट, then we should go for filter. Filter concept are used to performing pre or post processing request. If you want to perform any pre processing and post processing request, then we should go for filter concept. So servlet filters, what is the servlet filters? Servlet filters are a special web component of Java web application that are capable trapping either all request response or multiple request response. Okay, so if you want to perform any activity before processing the request or after processing the request, then we should go for filter, servlet filter concept. Just like what is the advantage? Suppose user send a request to servlet 1, but before processing the request, I want to validate the request. I want to check the request, whether request is a valid request, whether is a request is validated or not. So it means before processing the request, I want to check whether request is validated request. If the request is validated, then should go for servlet 1. Otherwise, don't go for servlet 1. Once response you sending, now we want, suppose you are sending the response in any format. I want to do any activity before sending the response to the client. So we want to execute some logic, then that logic we can write inside the filter concept. So filter concept, we can say filter concept are used before pre-processing or after processing. Before pre-processing request or after processing the request, if you want to perform any logic, then we should go for filter. So what is the most application areas where we can use filter concept? Just like security checking, like authorization, authentications, we can say most common areas where we can use filter, just logging, altering request information, altering response information, compressions of response, encryption of response. So if you want to do these things, we can do using filter concept. So how we can implement the filter concept? To implement the filter API, to develop the filter concept, basically we are using three interfaces. Okay, let's understand the filter API. This is a filter API. To develop filter, we require three interfaces. One is a filter, another is a filter config, and third one is a filter chain. There are three interfaces we have required. One is a filter, then second one is a filter config, and third one is a filter chain. Let's first of all understand the filter interface. What is the filter interface? Suppose if you want to develop any servlet, how you can develop any servlet? We have servlet interface, yes, no? So it means if you're creating any servlet in Java, by default every servlet directly or indirectly implement the servlet interface. In the similar way, if you want to develop any filter, by default every filter implements servlet interface directly or indirectly. Sorry, if you want to implement filter, by default every filter implements filter interface directly or indirectly. So every filter in Java must implement filter interface either directly or indirectly. Filter interface also have some following method. Filter interface contains three methods. Okay. If you want to create any filter, it means every filter in Java should implement filter interface either directly or indirectly. Filter interface contains three methods. One is the init method, destroy method, and do filter method. There are three methods. There are three methods present in filter interface. First one is a init method. Watch here. One is a init method. Init method what does? This method will be executed only one time to perform initialization activity. Watch here. In servlet interface also we have init method which takes servlet config as a parameter. Here similar way init method here which takes filter config as a parameter. So this method will be executed only once to perform initialization activity. And second one is a destroy method. This method will be executed only once to perform cleanup activity. And third one method is a do filter method. Do filter method, this method will be executed for every request. Entire filtering logic we have need to define inside this method. Do filter method takes three parameters: servlet request, servlet response, and filter chain. Okay. So do filter method contains three parameters: servlet request, servlet response, and filter chain. This method will be executed for every request. So whatever filtering logic you have to need to define, entire filtering logic we have need to define inside this method. Now we have one filter chain object actually. What to use the filter chain object? Using filter chain object, we can forward the request to the next level. Suppose here this is a client. Okay, this is a server. Now I'm sending the request from client to the server. Here we have suppose several filter. This is a filter 1, filter 2, and okay. Now first of all request executed by the process by filter 1. Then filter 1 forward the request to the next level filter. Now next level filter again forward the request to the servlet. So using filter chain object, we can forward the request to the next level. Next level can be another filter, yeah, servlet. Okay, so we can forward the request to the next level by using filter chain. Okay, now we understand what is a filter config. Filter config what does? Filter config just like a servlet config. Filter config for every filter. When you create a filter, for every filter, web container creates one filter config object. For every filter, web container create one filter config object. Okay, let's understand. Suppose this is the client. Okay, this is the server, and the server has several servlet. This is a servlet 1. Now we have filter. Suppose this is a filter 1. This is a filter 2. Okay. Now we're sending the request. Now request processed by filter 1. Now filter one forward the request to the next level, second filter. Now filter two forward the request to the servlet. Okay. Now, if you want to process this request, actually, which request? Filter chain, what does? Actually, filter chain forward the request to the next level. For each filter, have one filter config object. Okay. Web container creates one filter config object for each filter. Okay. Filter config object what contains? Filter config object contains filter level information. So for this filter level one information will contain by the filter config. So suppose this is a filter one, filter one. This is a filter two. Okay, filter two. And now filter config contain the information for filter level. So for each filter, web container creates one filter config object. Okay, read this line. Filter config. What is a filter config? For every filter, web container creates one filter config object. Filter config object holds its configuration information. Web container hand over this filter config object to the filter as an argument to the init method. Because filter interface contain init method take as an argument filter config. So web container hand over filter config object as a parameter up to the init method. Filter config interface contains this following method. Get filter name, you can get the filter name, and get init parameter, you can get the init parameter value by passing parameter. Get init parameter names and get servlet context. These are methods which is available into the filter config. Now we understand next level is a filter chain. What is a filter chain? Filter chain we can use the forward. We can use the filter chain to forward the request to the next level. Filter chain. What is the use of filter chain? Using filter chain we can forward the request to the next level. We can use filter to forward the request to the next level. Filter chain interface contains following method. That is a do filter method. It will take three parameters: servlet request, servlet response. Filter chain interface defines do filter method also. One important point: filter interface has three methods. Filter interface has three methods: init, destroy, and do filter. So filter interface also contains do filter method. Entire filter logic we have need to define inside the do filter method. Do filter contains three parameters: servlet request, servlet response, and filter chain. Filter chain interface also has do filter method, which takes two parameters: servlet request and servlet response. So what is the difference between filter interface do filter method and filter chain do filter method? Okay, we will discuss this point. Okay, but here right now, what is the use of filter? Let's we try to understand create how we can create a filter. So okay, now we open the Eclipse. Okay. Now we want to create one filter. Okay, so how we can create a filter? So suppose here we create one filter with the name first filter. So now select the project package. Now right click. Now new. Here watch here what we want to create. Class interface servlet. One. New Java. Okay. First here we need to change the Java double E. Okay. Now Okay. Now select new. Watch here. Here we have option filter. Now click on filter and give the filter name. Click on next, next, and finish. So now here we create a filter. You can watch here. So filter interface contains what? This is a constructor for filter, and watch here. Filter interface contains three life cycle method, three method. Init method. This is a init method. This is a destroy method, and this is a do filter method. Do filter method takes three parameters: servlet request, servlet response, and filter chain method. And now do filter method, entire logic we have need to write down inside the filter method. Okay, before processing the request, watch here. Here we need to place the code here before processing, we can say. Before request processing. Before request processing, if you want to do any logic, if you want to perform any activity, you can place here. You can write here. And once you complete the logic, and after that you want to pass the request to the next level, next filter. So here we are calling which method? Using filter chain. Filter chain, using filter chain, we are passing the request to the next level. Filter chain again call one our method do filter method. Do filter method is available in the filter chain, which take only two parameter request and response. Taking the same request response and passing the request to the next level. So we can say after that, if you want to, here you can place a code after processing the request. After processing the request, here you can place the code. Okay. After that, after calling this method, if you want to execute any logic after processing the request, that code you can place here. Understand this point. Do filter method, actually we entire filtering logic we need to place here. Here inside, before calling this method, if you want to perform any before processing request code, so you can place here. Once you call the chain.do filter, it means you are forwarding the request to the next level. And after that calling, if you want to write any code after processing the request, you can place here. Okay, let's here we create a which filter? Filter first filter. Okay, let's here we writing simple one statement. So just we create one. Here we writing simple statement. Then you will understand. Okay. So here we create what we are creating. We are creating print writer. Okay. Let's here we create a print writer object. Okay. So here we create a print writer object. Let's here we need to write the code before processing the request. Let's here we are simply writing one statement. This is the first filter before processing the request, pre-processing. And now we forward the request to the next level. And now after processing the request, if you want to perform any logic, then that logic we need to place where? After that line. So here we are writing out.println. This is the first filter after processing the request, post processing we can say. Here we before this line, here we can write pre-processing logic. After that we can write post-processing logic, post-request processing logic. So this is a pre-processing request and post-processing. Now we create our servlet. Let's here we create our servlet. Now we create one servlet. Right click, new, go to the servlet and give the servlet name. Servlet name is a target filter servlet I giving. Now next, next. Now we finish. So this is a servlet. Here we can write any state. Simple we writing one statement. This is a servlet filter. Sorry. So inside do get method. I'm simply writing printer. I'm getting the print writer, importing the. So simply we're writing this is a target filter. This is a target filter. Now what we need to configure. We need to configure filter. How we can configure filter? We can configure filter two ways. Using is the XML file, web.xml file. Another is using annotational. So first of all, we understand that using the web.xml file, how we can configure. Okay, let's now we try to configure. First of all, we configure the filter. First of all, we are configure the servlet. So here we open the web.xml file, web.xml file. We open the web.xml file. So what here? Here we configure the filter. Servlet, target servlet. Okay, target servlet. Well, what is the class name? Target servlet filter. Okay, servlet name is a target servlet filter, and URL pattern here we give that TS filter. So now here we are configure which servlet. Now we configure the filter. To configure the filter, we are using filter tag. Just like to configure the servlet, we are using servlet tag. In the similar way, here we are using which tag? Filter tag. So filter, just like servlet had contains servlet name and servlet class. Same way here we are using filter name and filter class. So now here we are using, you can check here, filter tag. Under filter tag we specify the filter name. What is the name of first filter? Filter class. Now in filter mapping we specify the filter name and URL pattern. Now URL pattern we need to given whatever URL pattern we are giving for servlet. Okay, this URL pattern also for which servlet? Target servlet filter. So when we sending the request for this servlet using this URL pattern, first of all container check any filter is configured for this URL pattern or not. Actually container first give the preference to the filter and then gives the preference to the servlet. First of all container will check whether any filter is configured for this URL pattern or not. If it is a configure, then it will execute that filter. So what here for this same URL pattern, we have one filter, that is the first filter. First filter we have for the same URL pattern. So in this way we can map filter. So this filter we are mapping for which servlet? Target filter servlet. Okay, we are executing this, running this application, and we try to understand. Okay, now we are select the application and go to the run on server. Next and finish. Okay. Now here we are passing the URL pattern. What is the URL pattern? You can check here. I have URL pattern is a TS. Okay, just I'm checking what is the URL pattern TS filter. So go to this URL pattern. Okay. Press enter. Watch here. You can check here. We are sending the request for the servlet, but for that servlet, when we are sending the request, first of all, container will check for this URL pattern any filter is configured. Yeah. Which filter is configured? First filter is configured. Now first it will execute, go to the first filter and execute this logic. Yes, no? Watch here. It execute the logic, whatever logic you're writing inside do filter. Entire filtering logic we need to place inside do filter method. And once it execute this logic, now it forward the request to the next level. What is the next level? Any other filter configure for this URL pattern? No other filter is configured. Yes, no? Now it go for which? Now request go to the next servlet. Actually, the servlet is configured for this URL pattern. Now request go to the target servlet filter. Now go request come into the target servlet filter. Now target servlet filter what print? This is the target servlet filter. You can check the output first of all. This is the first servlet request pre-processing. Then servlet code executed. This is a target servlet filter. Okay, and then request response sent back to the client. When request response sent back to the client, again filter comes into the picture. Yes, no? After processing the request, if you want to execute this code, so here we are writing this code. So this line will be executed after processing the request. So now what's here? What is the output? This is the first filter after processing the request. Okay, so now here we can write in a different line, then you will understand more better. BR tag here we are using. This is a target filter. This is the first filter. BR tag. Okay, save it again. Okay, let's now we write the TS filter. Now you can check here. First, filter logic will be executed. Then select logic will be executed. Then after processing, post processing, if you want to execute any logic, that logic will be executed. So we can say this is a pre-processing logic, and this is a servlet processing logic. And after processing this logic, so clear when we should go for filter. If we want to execute any logic before processing or after processing, if you want to perform any activity before pre-processing or after post-processing, then we should go for filter concept.